Good afternoon, alien enthusiasts, and welcome to another Angry Alien Bulletin. The thing that everybody is really waiting for when it comes right down to it, the NASA high-rise images still are not public, even though the government was officially reactivated. I would assume that NASA needs a little bit more time for everybody to get their ducks in the row, everybody to come back to work or whatever, but frankly, I don't think it matters very much. Regardless of what we see in these photos, unless they show us something really spectacular, like evidence that 3I Atlas's comet is enormous, 10 or 20 kilometers in diameter or something along those lines, or has a very strange, unnaturally looking morphology. In other words, unless these images show us something very bizarre, nobody's going to believe that they're legitimate. I mean, everyone's going to think that they were doctored if they turn out to be ordinary images of an ordinary comet with an ordinary nucleus. No one will believe that any of that is true. And frankly, even I might think that they've been doctored. I mean, I don't subscribe to conspiracy theories ever, really. But given the fact that these images have been hidden from the public now for well over a month, even though the high-rise website, the very website that announces photos, discoveries, etc., made by this orbiting satellite, that has remained active. That has continued to post image after image after image of Mars, images that have been captured during the time of the government shutdown. The only images from the high-rise camera that won't be publicized or haven't been publicized are 3I Atlas. Obviously, these are things that could have easily been done. The official explanation is that, well, 3I Atlas images would be a general NASA announcement, and that can't be done during a government shutdown. Bullshit. I'm finding it more and more difficult to accept the government's explanation on any of this. So even though I'm interested in seeing these images from the high rise, I have a feeling that what we're going to see is something that nobody is going to believe is real. All that having been said, we do have new images of 3I Atlas, and they've revealed a number of intriguing things. For one thing, 3I Atlas hasn't disintegrated. In addition to that, 3I Atlas still has what's called this anti-tail, these anti-tail jets spearing out towards the sun to a distance of nearly 1 million kilometers. And interestingly enough, at the same time that these jets started to be detected, and also at the same time the 3I Atlas disappeared behind the sun briefly, the sun has entered into a period of extreme solar activity, including a massive solar storm that prevented Blue Origin from launching a Mars mission yesterday. And so I began to wonder, is there any way 3I Atlas might be triggering these things? I've talked about it before, but I decided to delve into the science of the matter. If we're assuming 3I Atlas possesses extremely advanced technology significantly beyond what we 21st century humans have at our disposal, could 3I Atlas be making these things happen? And even if it isn't, the existence of these anti-jets prove that 3I Atlas is no ordinary comet. Okay, so we're going to take this line item by line item. First of all, let's talk about the anti-tail jets themselves and the images that we've captured from 3I Atlas and how the two interrelate. Previously, Avi Loeb explained that an anti-tail jet, or actually the collection of anti-tail jets that we've seen emitting from 3I Atlas that are nearly 1 million kilometers in length, must contain so much matter that they should have destroyed 3I Atlas by now. This much matter, defying the solar wind, should have destroyed 3I Atlas if the anti-jets we're observing were created by natural causes. So what do the facts say? What do these new images reveal? And also, how do we know that these anti-tail jets are that unusual anyway? So as I mentioned before, images taken of 3I Atlas on November 11th show a single body with no evidence for breakup following the perihelion passage of 3I Atlas 2 weeks earlier. These images were taken by David Jewett and Jane Loon on the Nordic Optical Telescope with a primary mirror of 2.56 meters in diameter located at La Palma in the Canary Islands. The prominent elongation of the glow surrounding 3I Atlas projects to a position angle of about 106 degrees. This is close to the projected sunward direction of 115 degrees. It resembles the image captured by the Hubble Space Telescope on July 21st, which showed an anti-tail pointing towards the sun. In units of the Earth-Sun separation, the distances of 3I Atlas from the sun and the Earth were 1.43 astronomical units and 2.16 astronomical units, respectively. Now, keep in mind, this is a long ways away from the sun still, and yet 3I Atlas seems to be extremely active. Again, that in itself is a bit strange. The long-range jet structures evident in these images are not evident in this data, but that's probably because it was taken through an R-band filter that excluded most of the gaseous emission lines. Given the large-scale jets reported recently, the fact that 3I Atlas remains a single body is surprising for a natural comet. In particular, the large-scale image of 3I Atlas, this one showing jets reaching out to 1 million kilometers towards the sun and 3 million kilometers in the opposite direction. For a natural comet, the outflow velocity of these jets is expected to be about 400 meters per second. And at that speed, the jets must have persisted over a time scale of 1 to 3 months, even though we haven't seen that much of an evidence for them for that long of a period of time. But more importantly, given that the jets towards the sun were stopped by the solar wind at a distance of 1 million kilometers, their mass density must be absolutely enormous compared to a normal cometary tail, a few million proton masses per cubic centimeter at a distance of 1 million kilometers from 3I Atlas. The product of this mass density and the outflow speed implies a mass flux of 5 billion tons of matter per month per area of 1 million kilometers on a side. And if you consider the size of the jets overall, the entire mass of 3I Atlas must be gone by now, unless 3I Atlas is much bigger and much heavier than even Avi Loeb calculated. Either one, it is a strange thing indeed. And also, this much mass bleeding out of 3I Atlas should have delivered enormous amounts of energy to the object as well, 700 joules per square meter per second. And if 3I Atlas were subjected to this much energy, again, it should have destroyed it. But there's something else that's important to talk about here. We're talking about how dense the jets must have been, how powerful they must have been in order to overcome the strength of the solar wind out to a distance of 1 million kilometers. How much energy are we actually talking about here, and has anything like this ever happened before? Well, first of all, let's go ahead and plug in the numbers, and it is just mind-boggling here what would be necessary for a natural comet to do what we are currently seeing. First of all, let's look at an anti-tail from a conventional comet. This is Comet Hale-Bopp, and as you can see, there appears to be an anti-tail extending out towards the sun. But this is actually an optical illusion. It's purely perspective. The real dust tail is still pointing away from the sun, and all we are seeing is the trailing dust tail seen edge on with a ribbon of old dust released weeks or months earlier lying in front of the nucleus from our viewpoint. In other words, these are not real jets spearing out towards the sun. This is not some sort of bizarre phenomenon, which, by the way, this anti-tail dwarfs what 3I Atlas has produced. This is something that was produced entirely as a result of our perspective and an optical illusion. What 3I Atlas is showing is a true sunward ejection because Earth is nowhere near the comet's orbital plane. So this plane crossing phenomenon would not happen with this type of object. And multiple independent images show 4 to 7 narrow linear jets shooting directly towards the sun with measured lengths of almost 1 million kilometers. These are real physical outflows, and we have never seen these types of sunward spikes before. Let's go ahead and give you an example of some sunward plumes that actually have been observed in the past. I'm going to go ahead and bring up Comet 103P/Hartley 2. And fortunately, we had an opportunity to observe this comet at short range by a NASA mission called Epoxy back on November 4th, 2010 at a distance of 694 kilometers. This comet also had dozens of narrow collimated jets shooting directly towards the sun from the nucleus. But the difference is these jets ranged anywhere from 10 to 60 kilometers above the surface. 10 to 60, not 1 million. And again, the reason for that is that there's only so far these jets could go before the solar wind would overpower them and drive them back. So this, by the way, is the most dramatic example of an antitail, a true antitail, not an optical illusion antitail that we have ever seen before. We are talking about jet lengths of 10 to 60 kilometers as opposed to 1 million, jet widths of 100 to 200 meters as opposed to 5 to 10,000 kilometers. And as far as the drivers are concerned, well, carbon dioxide and water ice suddenly sublimating were the primary drivers for Hartley 2. We can't imagine the force necessary to push this much mass towards the sun against the solar wind. Let's go ahead and crunch some numbers here. Let's estimate that the antitail contains about 1 billion kilograms worth of mass. Actually, we think it's a lot more than that, but let's say it's 1 billion. The amount of energy necessary to push that much mass against the solar wind out to that kind of distance is 10 million kilowatt hours, the equivalent of a tactical nuclear explosion. What is the maximum energy that we have ever observed with natural processes? Let's start off with water ice sublimation. The most we have ever seen delivered by water ice sublimation is 10 to the 11th power joules per outburst. Too weak by a factor of at least 100 and probably at least 1,000. As far as dry ice CO2 sublimation jets, well, Comet Hartley actually demonstrated 10 to the 9th power joules, about 1 billion joules per jet. Once again, this is 10,000 times too weak. What about a cryovolcanic eruption, the likes of which we see on the surface of the moon Enceladus? And these are dynamic explosions, by the way. 10 to the 10th to 10 to the 11th power joules per eruption. That's still 100 times short. And what about impact vaporization? Another object happened to hit 3I Atlas producing this sort of eruption. That produced 10 to the 12th power joules on a comet called Tempel 1, which is the closest, but still 10 times short. And incidentally, in that comet, the jets did not actually head towards the sun anyway. And here's the most important thing to consider. When we're talking about the Hartley researchers, one of them, Jessica Sunshine, who is a co-author on the primary paper done on these sunward jets, had this to say, quote, "This is the first time we've ever seen a comet shooting material towards the sun. The first time, and only time, by the way, that we've seen material actually shooting towards the sun generated by a comet, and 10 to 60 kilometers as opposed to a million. It makes no sense. However, an artificial process, for example, artificial thrusters, could definitely generate the necessary energy to overcome the solar wind. As a matter of fact, it seems to be the only motivating force powerful enough to do this. Okay. So against all odds, 3I Atlas seems to be perfectly intact. And in addition to that, these anti-tail jets defy everything that we have seen with natural comets before. So many people arguing that this is the sort of thing that we have seen before, but as we've seen, there are no natural comets that have created anti-tail jets that come close to rivaling what we are observing with 3I Atlas. It frustrates the hell out of me to see that mainstream astronomy, mainstream scientists, and mainstream journalists, for that matter, are not recognizing this obvious fact. That being the case, then, if these anti-tail jets are not natural, if they are something else, well, rather than being some sort of propulsion system, what if they were some kind of technology designed to trigger coronal mass ejections? And why would 3I Atlas be doing this? Okay, first of all, to determine whether or not there's a connection between 3I Atlas's arrival at perihelion and all of these solar storms, I researched how many solar storms have actually taken place since the first anti-solar jet that we detected on October 23rd to now, and the results were quite amazing. There were actually a total of 7 major solar events, major solar storms, which is an highly, highly elevated level of activity. On October the 28th, there was an X1.0 class flare from a particular cluster of sunspots known as AR3664, which eventually evolved into a new formation called AR4274. That was the first event. Then on October 31st, there was another CME, although this one was not directed at Earth. And then on November 3rd, there was another event, a similar flare, again from that same location, AR4274. And then on November 9th, another major flare, again from that same location, this one partially Earth-directed. And then on November 10th, yet another one. This one again directed at Earth. And then November 11th, the strongest flare of 2025, all right? The strongest CME that we have observed so far this year took place almost immediately after 3I Atlas reached perihelion and during the time that these jets were directed towards the sun. And this particular flare was fully Earth-directed and triggered severe blackouts across Africa and Europe. And then on the 12th, there was yet another one, another flare, again from that AR4274 location, which is sort of a lingering coronal mass ejection from a prior event. And again, this one ended up being Earth-directed and extended the G4 solar storm into November 13th. In other words, into today. This was the solar storm that prevented Blue Origin from launching their rocket. This was the solar storm that forced the International Space Station crew to set up different sleeping arrangements where they would be more sheltered from solar radiation. 7 major events, which was the most active period of 2025. As a matter of fact, this accounts for almost 25% of all X-class flares, in other words, all strong solar storms in 2025 during this brief period of time, this 3-week window. This is very bizarre indeed. Once again, coinciding with 3I Atlas arriving at perihelion and these bizarre sunward-facing jets. So let's assume that each jet contained between 10 to the 18th and 10 to the 20th power programmable von Neumann nanomachines. Von Neumann, by the way, was the scientist who theorized about the von Neumann probe, a self-replicating probe that could spread across the galaxy simply by producing duplicates of itself. Each machine would be 50 nanometers in size, absolutely tiny, meaning that all of these nanomachines combined would be a total payload mass of about 100 kilograms, absolutely negligible compared to the overall mass of the jets. Now, the energy source would be built-in radioisotope microreactors, or perhaps a solar pumped laser. There's a lot of solar radiation around after all, and their function is to release ions in pulse jets from internal reservoirs. And the step-like features of this anti-tail, the brightness variations in the anti-tail, would be a result of these pulse jets taking place or being released, and they ride the comet's radiation pressure tail sunward at about 600 kilometers per second relative to the nucleus. This would allow the jets to reach about 0.3 to 0.5 astronomical units in 2 to 4 days, which is exactly the distance where solar magnetic field lines are still open, but coronal plasma is dense enough to manipulate. So how do these nanomachines actually create a coronal mass ejection? Well, you don't have to fight the sun. You just nudge it at the right spot. Your target is a coronal helmet streamer, which is a dense plasma ball trapped above the magnetic inversion line. The nanomachines self-assemble into conductive filaments or magnetic mirrors along these field lines. Then they locally enhance reconnection rates by injecting extra free electrons and also emitting phased microwave pulses. This increases the ionization of the solar atmosphere considerably, and the result is a controlled eruption 100 times smaller than a natural X-class flare, but perfectly timed and aimed. A modest M-class coronal mass ejection, by the way, releases 10 to the 24th power joules, and the nanomachines only need to supply the trigger energy, which is about 10 to the 16th to 10 to the 18th power joules, which could be easily stored in 50 kilograms of microreactors, or perhaps it could be harvested from the solar wind itself. So you're looking at a conversion rate, or rather a return on energy investment, of at least 1 million times, and possibly as much as 100 million times the energy. So in other words, these nanomachines are getting 100 million times as much energy back from the energy it requires to trigger these coronal mass ejections in the first place. And what if they could also harvest this solar energy and transmit it back to 3I Atlas in the form of microwaves? We have already theorized the possibility of creating space-based solar farms that could do precisely the same thing. Granted, they use conventional solar collectors instead of nanomachines, but they transmit the solar energy back to Earth in the same form, in the form of microwaves. And the amount of energy that you would get out of a coronal mass ejection would absolutely dwarf the energy of conventional solar power. Not only is this theoretically possible, it actually fits the data. The more intense and obvious the jets become, the more intense and powerful the solar storms have become since 3I Atlas's approach, arrival, and departure from perihelion. It's yet another coincidence in the strange history of this interstellar object, and this one, in my opinion, is very difficult to reject. So granted, I admit that this is still a pretty far-fetched theory. We don't have a lot of proof indicating that these anti-tails are comprised of nano-machines or any other type of technology, but nevertheless, it is an interesting coincidence that we have observed these anti-tail jets both before and after perihelion, and immediately surrounding this time, we had these coronal mass ejections. And as we have seen, a CME could be extremely useful to a passing ship if it was in need of an enormous amount of energy, and if these nanomachines were capable of absorbing the energy somehow, essentially as tiny solar collectors that then transmit the energy via microwaves. It would be extremely logical for 3I Atlas to be doing something like this, and we might be completely incidental in the midst of all of this drama. 3I Atlas might not be interested in Earth or indeed our solar system, but rather is interested in our sun. Our sun, being extremely active at the moment, is very vulnerable to manipulation, at least theoretically. If the sun were in a normal cycle or in a slow cycle, something along those lines, or perhaps even a little less active than it is right now, it'd be much more difficult to trigger these coronal mass ejections. But the sun is very, very active right now. And so therefore, any ionization introduced into the solar atmosphere, as we have seen, could indeed be making these things happen and generating a lot of energy for 3I Atlas. And what does it intend to use this energy for? Well, as I mentioned in a previous episode, 3I Atlas seems to have a particular target in mind. A faraway star nearly 500 light years away where something quite amazing has happened. An entire solar system's worth of material, an evolving solar system that is, a young solar system with a star very much like our own. 1,000,000 trillion tons worth of material vanished in the space of a few years. And by incredible coincidence, 3I Atlas is heading straight for this star. Is it possible that it needs all of this energy in order to turn up its interstellar drive, so to speak? Make its way towards the star at a much faster speed once it actually clears our solar system, once it no longer has a lot of debris, micrometeoroids, asteroids, other things that could potentially be threatening to a vessel traveling at a very high velocity. Could it be that 3I Atlas is going to kick into gear once it starts exiting our solar system? In my opinion, we need to keep a close eye on this thing for a long time to see what it does as it makes its departure. But regardless, given everything that we've learned thus far, and regardless of what the high-rise photos reveal, I think it's very easy to say that we are not dealing with an ordinary comet here at all. And if it is a natural object, man, it's a strange one, and it can teach us quite a lot of things. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and also please keep in mind that the 3I Atlas merchandise is still available in the store right now. We're going to keep it available through the week of Black Friday, the weekend rather of Black Friday. On that Monday, on Cyber Monday, that's the day that we're going to close the store down. So if you haven't gotten your merchandise yet, make sure to get a hold of it as soon as possible. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, stay angry about space.